A studio paid $60 million for Chris Pratt to sit in a chair for 2 hours. Another one handed $60 million to a director who literally delivered the biggest box office bomb of the 90s. Every single person on the internet called these flops months in advance, except the executives who greenlit them. Amazon has this thing where they spend insane amounts of money on mid-budget thrillers, give them theatrical releases, and then act surprised when nobody shows up. Masters of the Universe is apparently costing them over $200 million. They've got cash to burn, and they're proving it. So when Crime 101 got announced with a $93 million budget, people in the industry started doing the math, and it just didn't work. This is a generic crime thriller with Chris Hemsworth that looks like something you'd watch on streaming. Why are you spending nearly $100 million on that? Why are you putting it in theaters? Nobody could figure out where all that money went. Hemsworth costs money, sure. Mark Ruffalo, Halle Berry, they're not cheap. But even accounting for star salaries, how do you get to $93 million? John Wick Chapter 4 costs less than that. The Northman costs less than that. This is a guy-in-a-room thriller, not an action spectacle. The answer is that Amazon just doesn't care. They're a streaming company playing at being a movie studio, and theatrical box office isn't really the point for them. But if that's true, why release it theatrically at all? Just put it on Prime and call it a day. Instead, they dumped it into Valentine's Day weekend with almost no marketing. The review embargo lifted 2 days before release, and it made $16 million over 4 days. Hemsworth's worst opening in 8 years. It's at $66 million worldwide now. Needs over 200 to break even. Amazon will eventually put it on Prime, and that'll be that. But the whole thing was such an obvious waste from the start, you gotta wonder what the point was. In 2022, Lionsgate made a decision that should have gotten someone fired. They let Renny Harlin shoot 3 Strangers movies back-to-back in Slovakia. If you don't know who Renny Harlin is, he's the guy who made Cutthroat Island, which basically bankrupted a studio. He made Driven, Mindhunters, The Legend of Hercules, just decades of absolute bombs. There might not be another working director with a longer streak of failures. And Lionsgate gave him 3 movies at once. The plan was to shoot them cheap $8.5 million each and release them fast, ride the nostalgia for the original Strangers movie from 2008, and hope people showed up. The first movie made $48 million worldwide, so it looked like maybe the gamble worked. But in reality, it was just a cheap slasher trading on a brand name from 15 years ago. So when Chapter 2 got delayed a year and came back with reshoots, you knew it was going to drop hard. And it did. $22 million, lost more than half the audience. Which basically meant Chapter 3 was doomed before it even opened. Lionsgate knew it too. They dumped it into Super Bowl weekend with minimal marketing and fewer theaters. Thursday previews came in at $450,000. It made $9.2 million total. The whole trilogy averages 16% on Rotten Tomatoes. Lionsgate shot 3 bad movies at once and killed whatever goodwill the Strangers brand had left. All for a combined worldwide gross that barely cracks $80 million. And Harlan's already shot his next movie with Melissa Barrera and John Travolta. Guy just keeps working somehow. There's a pattern with Chris Pratt that's pretty obvious if you look at his filmography. Guy's one of the highest-grossing actors working, but every single hit is franchise-based or IP. Guardians of the Galaxy, Jurassic World, now Mario. His biggest non-franchise movie was Passengers, and even that had Jennifer Lawrence carrying half the load. So when Mercy got announced, you could already see the problem. Chris Pratt in an original thriller about artificial intelligence directed by Timur Bekmambetov. But Pratt doesn't open original movies, and Bekmambetov hasn't had a commercially successful Hollywood film since Wanted in 2008. That's 18 years. Then the trailer dropped and it looked like Minority Report on a budget, with Pratt stuck in a chair talking to an AI judge for 90 minutes. Budget is $60 million, which is just nuts for what looks like a streaming movie. Industry pre-sales were so bad that people were saying it might not even hit double digits domestically. And they were almost right, it opened with 10 million. Opening weekend also got hit by storms that closed hundreds of theaters across the East Coast, but honestly it wouldn't have mattered. This thing was dead on arrival, made 54 million worldwide on a 60 million budget. They finished shooting Return to Silent Hill, and then the movie sat on a shelf for over a year while they tried to find someone to distribute it. That's all you need to know. When a completed movie spends that long looking for a distributor, it means nobody wants to touch it. Either the quality's bad or they don't think they can sell it, or both. This is the third Silent Hill movie. The first two barely made their money back and got terrible reviews. Why would anyone think a third one would work? But someone greenlit it anyway. They shot it for $23 million, and then when it was done, nobody wanted it. When the trailers finally dropped, you could see why. Parts of it looked genuinely cheap. And the pitch is tough. It's a video game adaptation of a horror game from 2001 that most people under 30 have never heard of. Silent Hill 2 fandom is super small, not enough to support a wide theatrical release. It got an 18% on Rotten Tomatoes. At one point, it was the worst reviewed video game movie in 20 years until Borderlands took that title back. China saved it from being a complete disaster, made 18 million there for some reason. Everywhere else, it flopped completely. Ended up with 47 million worldwide. Apparently, there's a longer director's cut because the producers wanted it under 2 hours. Not sure if we're ever going to see that. Gore Verbinski hadn't made a movie in almost 10 years. The guy who directed the Pirates of the Caribbean movies just disappeared for a decade. Then he comes back with a gonzo time travel comedy about a guy from a dystopian future who recruits people to save the world from AI. Starring Sam Rockwell. Distributed by Briarcliff Entertainment, a small label with basically no major hits. You didn't need to be a box office analyst to know this wasn't going to be a commercial breakout. The concept is weird and hard to sell. It's about time travel and saving the world from AI, but it's also a quirky indie thing that doesn't fit into any easy marketing box. Sam Rockwell's a great actor, but he's never been a box office draw. And Briarcliff doesn't have the muscle to push a movie into the mainstream the way a major studio can. Verbinski made it for $20 million, which is impressively tight for him. But even at that budget, there was no path to profitability in theaters. Made $8.7 million total after being in release for weeks. And word of mouth was actually strong enough that they extended its theatrical run, which almost never happens with a movie that's flopping. This one was always going to be a cult movie, not a hit. Sometimes you make a movie because you want to make it, not because it's going to make money. At least this one's getting a second life on streaming where people are actually finding it. Brett Ratner hasn't worked in Hollywood in 7 years. After multiple allegations during Me Too, he got dropped by his agency and basically vanished from the industry. No charges were ever filed, he denied everything, but his career was over. Then Amazon decided to work with him on a documentary about Melania Trump, co-produced by Melania herself, and they paid $40 million for it. They also spent $35 million on marketing. The Taylor Swift era's concert film spent less than that on promotion. A normal doc campaign runs maybe $5 to $7 million tops. It ended up being the most expensive documentary in history. Here is the problem with that. Documentaries don't make money in theaters anymore. The Michael Moore era where a doc could gross over $200 million is long gone. In the streaming age, people don't leave their houses for documentaries. And this one had an incredibly niche audience. Even accepting that 80 million people voted for Trump in 2024, how many of those people are going to buy a ticket to see a documentary about his wife? It made $7.1 million opening weekend. They'd originally planned for over 2,000 theaters but scaled back to 1,400 when pre-sales were terrible. Right now, it's sitting at 16.6 million worldwide, and most of that is domestic. They rolled it out in 27 international territories, but there's no audience for this in Europe or anywhere else. Dwayne Johnson wanted to do serious acting. He signed on to play troubled MMA fighter Mark Kerr in a Benny Safdie biopic, and everyone started talking about Oscar buzz. Johnson doing real dramatic work for once instead of franchise blockbusters. But there was a recent comparison that should have told everyone how this would go. The Iron Claw came out in 2024. It was a wrestling biopic, similar genre, way more accessible story, and it made $45 million total. That's with Zac Efron and a broader appeal. The Smashing Machine cost $50 million to make, and it opened to $5.8 million. Lowest opening of Johnson's entire career for a tentpole film, and this was supposed to be his Oscar vehicle. By the time award season rolled around, the buzz was dead. The Oscars came and went, and Johnson wasn't anywhere near it. The movie had flopped in theaters months earlier, and nobody was talking about it anymore. It ended at 21 million worldwide. Johnson posted on social media about being disappointed with the box office, but proud of the performance. And he should be proud, it's probably his best acting work. But the movie was too serious for his fan base and too niche for the art house crowd. MMA biopics are a tough sell to begin with. When you're spending $50 million on it and hoping it crosses over to mainstream audiences, you're setting yourself up for failure. Greenland came out in December 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic when theaters were half closed and most people were staying home. It made $52 million worldwide on a $35 million budget, which under those circumstances was actually pretty good. Add in another $30 million from home video sales and you've got a solid profit. So naturally, they greenlit a sequel, and this is where someone should have asked some basic questions. First question. If most people watched the first one at home during lockdown, why would they want to see the sequel in theaters? The whole reason Greenland succeeded was because it was available on streaming when nobody was going to movies. Second question. Why did you wait 5 years? The first movie ended on a cliffhanger setup for a sequel, and then they just sat on it. By the time Migration came out in January 2026, whatever momentum existed was long gone. Third question, and this is the big one. Why does this sequel cost $90 million? The first one cost $35. Why are you making a sequel to a streaming movie and spending 2.5 times more money on it? Nobody had good answers to any of these questions. It opened to $8.5 million domestically, good for 5th place. Avatar stayed at number 1, and even a killer chimp movie called Primate beat it. It made $20 million total in North America. Worldwide, it's at $44 million, less than the first film made during a pandemic when most theaters were closed. The problem was always obvious. Streaming devalued theatrical releases. People got used to watching Greenland at home. You can't just flip that and expect them to buy tickets for the sequel. Vanity Fair put Charli XCX on their cover a few months ago and called her the next queen of Hollywood. This was before any of her movies had come out. She'd shot 7 films, but nobody had seen them yet, so nobody knew if she could actually act. Turns out she can't. In fact, she was supposed to play the White Witch in Greta Gerwig's Narnia movie and lost the role to Emma Mackey after bombing her audition. But A24 was betting on her anyway. They produced The Moment, a mockumentary about Charli on tour based on her own idea. Spent $4 million on it. Thing is, pop stars doing movies almost never works unless they're playing themselves or the movie is built entirely around their music. Look at The Weeknd's Hurry Up Tomorrow from last year. Guy's one of the biggest musicians on the planet, and his movie was a box office bomb. And mockumentaries have an even worse track record commercially. They're tricky to market, tough to sell, and most people just don't care about them. So you've got a mockumentary vanity project starring a pop star who can't act based on an original idea by that same pop star. It premiered at Sundance and flopped, made just $5 million. Sometimes a movie spends so long in development hell that by the time it finally comes out, you know it's going to be terrible. Psycho Killer is one of those movies. The script was written by Andrew Kevin Walker, who wrote Seven, and that should be a good sign, right? Guy who wrote one of the best thrillers of the 90s comes back to the genre. Except this thing started development in the mid-2000s. Originally, it was going to be directed by Fred Durst, the Limp Bizkit guy. Durst eventually left, and producer Gavin Polone took over as director in 2010. This was his directorial debut, and then the project just sat there for over a decade before they finally shot it in 2023. By the time they got around to making it, the budget had been slashed from $17 million down to under $10 million. And after they finished shooting, the movie sat in post-production for almost 3 full years before getting a release. That's never a good sign. When a movie sits on a shelf for 3 years, it usually means the studio doesn't know what to do with it or doesn't believe in it at all. 20th Century didn't screen it for critics ahead of release. That's basically admitting they've got a stinker. They dumped it into theaters in February with almost no marketing, and it opened with a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. Opening day box office was $250,000. Total gross is $2.5 million. No word on international release, which doesn't surprise me.